In this interview, I spoke with Paul Witty about the Sound Diaries project, the idea of treating sound as data, and his approach to publishing recordings as open data.
The Sound Diaries project is a project which explores everyday life in sound. That's the kind of tagline that we use to describe it. It was developed with a researcher called Felicity Ford. She was particularly interested in the domestic soundscape, so the sounds of home, and particularly her home. One of the things that we were finding was, this was in around 2008, a lot of people had smartphones. There were a lot more photographs being taken. We were documenting our lives visually in a really kind of quite an explosive way in terms of the number of images that any individual would own. And I think what we started to think about, because we were interested in sound was our field, how would this relate to the way that we collect, explore, document our sounding lives? And so just at that time, you were beginning to be able to record sound on mobile phones. You were beginning to be able to have very easily handheld digital sound recorders, because up until that time, we'd been using formats like mini disc or DAT, which had a very limited amount of time available to record, were often cumbersome, difficult to edit, difficult to transfer from one format to another. Whereas with the advent of small handheld digital recorders, which used SD cards, suddenly this became much, much easier. And so we decided to try and hold back the tide of visual images with our own sounding moments of everyday life. We did a lot of different projects with vending machines, dishwashers, toasters, tumble dryers, all of the kind of things you would find in a kind of kitchen or domestic environment. We investigated roads, we investigated the sound of the street. And one of the things that we thought a lot about was the writing of Georges Perec, a French writer who spent a lot of time just observing life in Paris. He talks a lot about trying to exhaust a place, to understand something completely, maybe by making lists, maybe by spending time there on a regular basis, revisiting the same place day after day after day to kind of find out more about the way it was behaving, and not looking at the extraordinary, but looking at the ordinary, looking at the paving slabs, the tarmac, what people were wearing, their shoes, all of those kinds of things. And so we were really interested in trying to get to a situation where we would have a similar archive or a way of listing audio events.
How did you start thinking about sound as data?
We thought a lot about what these sounds were for, what this recording was for, what the purpose of it was. We thought a lot about the communities maybe involved in the sites or places where we recorded sounds, and tried to think about how they could be useful. And then, of course, we started to think that just maybe these sounds we were recording were data, and they could be used to understand a kind of past behaviour, perhaps, or project future behaviour in spaces. One of the other areas of interest that I have is sounding archaeology. So the idea that we can understand a space through the way that the sound in that space changes over time. And so we started to think that perhaps we should capture these things, because in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, in the way that you'd go back and look at photographs to understand a physical environment, we might go back and look at those same, or listen to those sounds to understand our auditory environment and what we were listening and what we were hearing. We're always trying to develop new ways of thinking about how that might work. So one project I'm engaged with at the moment is called Get Some Chalk on Your Boots, which is a project about sound and football, the sound and culture of football. It has very many different forms, the project, but something I'm working on at the moment is I've been talking to a photographer in Holland called Hans van der Meer. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, he made a lot of photographs of non-league football, lower league, grassroots football, football outside of stadia, football on parks, recreation grounds, and so on. He did the work around Europe. A lot of it focused around Holland and Belgium, but he also came over to Yorkshire, took photographs there. I became interested in this collection of photographs, and particularly because he'd also made films. So obviously I realised there was also sound material. So I've been working with him to extract the sound from the films, and then I'll be returning to those sites over the next kind of 2 or 3 years to make further sound recordings and then make a comparative analysis of the general soundscape, but also the soundscape within a football game. So the soundscape of the way players talk to each other, the way that coaches, managers, spectators behave in that environment. So I'm imagining it's going to reveal to us a lot about changes in population, society, culture, governance, the way that local authorities work with public spaces.